Why play Chem-Barons? Well, you might have the trait active on stage 2. You want to have a bit of a different experience from some of your other games of TFT, and you think that you can take the Chem-Baron trait and convert it to a win out, because this is a trait that has a very high percentage chance of going first, which makes it quite exciting. However, it is very stressful, it is very risky, and often it's very difficult because you're playing close to death. It's a loss trait, so what you want to do is you want to lose as many rounds as possible and then instantly on a dime convert that into a win out. So you put a lot of pressure on yourself to basically have a very few rounds to convert into a win. So that often leads to you maybe going first or a lot of times going 8th. So what are Chem-Barons? So the Chem-Baron trait in set 13 is the dedicated loss trait. What that means is that you're trying to lose as many rounds as possible in order to get a really big cash out that you can then convert to a win. You gain Shimmer after each player combat, and then the main thing is that if your loss streak is at least 3, you're going to gain more Shimmer. So what you want to do is you want to get that loss streak up to 3, and then you want to keep losing every single round, and then as soon as you're a very low HP that you don't think you can lose any more rounds more reliably and still live, then you instantly try and convert that into a win out, take your cash out, and then try and get your first or at least your top 4. Each stack of 100 Shimmer, there's a black market that appears that offers you contraband that only Chem-Barons can use. These are items, some of them at the lower levels of Shimmer, at the lower level Shimmer markets, they're basically like worse than most items, so they're not that good. But if you can keep pushing the trait and you skip black market shops, you will then get items for these Chem-Barons that are very strong. Namely, there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We're going to go through all the items a little bit later on in the video. However, you could when you skip these shops, you do gain extra HP. So your Chem-Barons will gain maximum HP. So if you have a lot of Chem-Barons in late in the game, you can make them really tanky by skipping a bunch of shops, getting to a really high Shimmer, which gives you a really good item, and then also gives all units a bunch of HP, and you can just convert that into a win a lot of the time. However, it is very conditional to play Chem-Barons, so you should really consider when to play Chem-Barons as like a big question. And a lot of it depends on like your spot on 2-1 or your spot on stage 2. I usually try and play Chem-Baron if I have a Chem-Baron crest. I think that reaching the 7 Chem-Baron and getting the amount of HP spike from 6 to 7 Chem-Baron is pretty massive in converting that into a top 1. So if I don't have a really good spot on stage 2 for Chem-Baron, Chem-Baron emblem is kind of like an indicator of maybe I can play towards this. The Chem-Baron crest, the gold version, gives you a Renata as well, and Chem-Baron crown gives you a Smeech, so you can actually make those higher levels of Chem-Baron and earn more Shimmer, because the more Chem-Barons you have on your board, the more Shimmer you can earn. So especially the prismatic version really puts you in a good spot to start earning a lot of Shimmer very early, which helps you in getting a better cash out and winning out on the game. Additionally, you don't really need an emblem to play Chem-Baron. A lot of times you do need a Smeech or a Rennie. If you get the game on stage 2 and you start the game off, with a Smeech or a Rennie, or you can pick it up on Carousel. A lot of times it's a really good decision to play around Chem-Baron, especially if you're already at a spot where you're not very strong in the lobby and you think that you can lose streak. So what are the conditions for success? I was kind of alluding to a little bit before, but typically you want Chem-Baron in on stage 2. Chem-Baron on stage 2 is really important if you're trying to reach those really high numbers. Typically, like the win con is reaching a Shimmer shop at 500 Shimmer. In order to get there, a lot of times you need to have Chem-Baron in on stage 2. I wouldn't really angle myself towards Chem-Baron if I don't already start the game off with either an emblem or a Rennie or a Smeech, because you need 3 Chem-Baron to actually activate the trait early on. However, there are a lot of really good players that are trying to play this in a more flexible way. We will discuss that later. So there are ways to play Chem-Baron starting in stage 3 or starting like a lot later in the game in order to like convert some of the resources that you get from Chem-Baron into just additional resources to strengthen an already strong board. But typically, if we're talking about a general guide, you want it on stage 2. You also want to look around and see that you're the weakest in the lobby. If there's lots of other people that have augments or are also playing Chem-Baron or just in general are trying to sack early game, it makes it really hard for you to lose streak. So you want to be the one that if you look around, it's a very average lobby. People are leveling, people are upgrading units, so that you can very easily plan, okay, I look around, I can lose all of these matches pretty convincingly, therefore I can maximize my Shimmer gains and play around this Chem-Baron trait. Additionally, the lobby, sometimes if it's really high roll, it makes it really hard to actually do the cash out for Chem-Baron. So namely in lobbies like Jinx lobby or Savika lobby, so that's like effectively like Crab Rave, Scuttle Puddle, or Loot Sub, where there's a lot of variance in the lobby. Sometimes people just hit Exodia, they just hit like a really strong board. So then even though you're playing around Chem-Baron, you have such a thin margin that sometimes if you just don't upgrade enough units, or you don't make it to a level on the exact turn as somebody else, somebody who high rolls just walks on by, deletes you from the face of the earth, and you go 8th. And it doesn't really matter how strong Chem-Baron is as a trait, because you're playing with such narrow margins in these much more varied, much more like lots of loot style of lobbies. You gotta be very careful before you commit to Chem-Baron, because you could just grief your game. Additionally, you want to be able to take narrow losses. If there's one person that's really strong and one person that's really weak, it really ruins your Chem-Baron experience, because you have to be weaker than the weakest person in order to lose streak effectively. But then if somebody is very strong, if you end up fighting them, because matchmaking has a little bit of randomness to it, you're going to lose a lot of HP, and it makes it really hard for you to lose streak. You want to lose streak while being like slightly weaker than the weakest player, so that you're still killing units and you're preserving as much HP as possible to make sure that you reach those higher levels of Shimmer shops or black market shops, so you can get the better cash outs. Additionally, it's also scary because Silco is really popular, and the cash out also has a lot of variance, which we'll talk about after. So late game, you might still not win out depending on your Shimmer shops and all of that. So there's a lot of variance later. So really you should only play it if you really think it's cool, or you have a really good spot for it. You should be careful the whole way. But we're going to go through all of that during this video. So I'm just going to show you some stats on Chem-Baron. I like to show a little bit of stats, just to like give a little bit of an overview, so it's not just like trust me bro. There's some sort of backing in terms of like what people are playing and how they're playing it. If you look at Chem-Baron, basically 3, 4, 5 and 6 Chem-Baron, you're going to notice this trend where there's like a really large bar for placements of 1st, and there's a really large bar for placements of 8th. A lot of the times with Chem-Baron, it's very 1st or 8th, and in general, lower costs of Chem-Barons, besides 3 Chem-Baron is like a 4.75, it has like a 40% chance of top 4, but basically everything else has a very low top 4 percentage chance. It is very scary. They're all sub 40. They're all averaging in the 5s. The reason is that it's very hard to convert a lot of the times, and there's a lot of randomness, as I was saying with it. It is a difficult trait. I'm sure the better the players, this is like filtered for Diamond Plus, the better the stats will be. But it's very difficult to convert to a 1st, because it just comes down to like the shop, your spot in the game, whether or not somebody decides to grief you, which is very hard to figure out ahead of time. It just comes down to if somebody decides to wreck your game for some reason, which happens a lot in TFT. There's too many variables that makes this a consistent, reliable top 4 if you're just playing towards the vertical trait. However, if you look at 7 Chem-Baron, it gives you so much HP, and it puts you in such a good spot that a lot of times 7 Chem-Baron is very skewed towards hitting a 1st. So if you can hit that 7 Chem-Baron, that's the one that you're really going for a lot of the time, and that's with a spatula. That's what I mean by your spot has to be really good. So if you don't want to be the person going 8th with these sub 7 Chem-Baron, so without a Chem-Baron spat, you want to make sure that you have a really good early game, or you're eventually pivoting off of the Chem-Baron. You're just using it as like a resource to hit certain boards or stuff like that. It's very important. Now, in terms of Chem-Baron, we said every 100 Shimmer that you earn, you get a shop. So the amount of Shimmer that you earn is based on the trait, which the trait, we showed it on the slide before, but I'll go back to it just for the sake of example. So here, like for example, you're either getting 15, if you have 3 Chem-Baron, you're either getting 15 Shimmer, or if you're 3 losses, you're earning 35 Shimmer. If you're like 7 Chem-Baron, you're either earning 30 Shimmer for a win, or if you're 3 loss streak, you're earning 100 Shimmer per a loss. So in general, when you're looking at Chem-Baron, these are the Shimmer shops. So once that adds up every single round, at these different intervals, you will then be able to pick from one of these options with a percentage chance of it appearing as your shop. So 100 Shimmer, kind of useless, not really super important. 200 Shimmer we'll talk about a little bit later, because there's some of these cash outs that are very situationally indicative of a really good option of a spot. For example, like the Renata option, and you'll start to see there's these tier 1, tier 0 items. We're going to go through the tier items at the end of this, because they're at the bottom of the page. 300 Shimmer is where you start to get into the point of, okay, we're starting to get some good items here, because you get the tier 2 item. Now, the tier 2 item and the tier 1 items, these are random, but you could often get into a really good spot if you hit 300 Shimmer. This is like the breaker point of like the goal where you're trying to like win the game, kind of, right? 300 Shimmer is like right there of like you might win some games, you might go 8th some games. It's kind of like a fuzzy area. It just depends a lot on the randomness of what items you get and whether or not your board is prepared for those particular items. Breakpoint 4 is 400 Shimmer. This is typically the one where people are like, this is a guaranteed top 4. A lot of times if you cash out 400 Shimmer, as long as your board isn't absolute dog shit, you should be fine to get a top 4 pretty reliably. And then 500 Shimmer, this is the breakpoint where people declare you going first. This is the one that if you can make it to 500, there's a very, very high chance you go first because you get a tier 3 item. The tier 3 items are the broken items. It doesn't matter which item it is, minus like maybe one of them. Most of the items that you hit here are just gonna make you instant win. This is the one that you usually aim for, and then everything after this is just a meme for a YouTube video. You know, you can hit 600 or 700 or 800, but it's more for like Easter egg and fun. The main thing is the 500. This one's the one where you're trying to aim for it. If you have a Chem-baron emblem, like a Chem-baron spatula, you want to aim for 500, right? If you're 7 Chem-baron, you're aiming for 500. If you are in an insane spot, like you have some like crazy health regen, or you have like 6 cost early and you're like able to push it a little bit further, then 600 is like even more of a win, and 700 is like a guaranteed win. It gives you a 3-star Silco. Now, in terms of the items, we're going to go through them. Basically, like the tier 0 items, these are basically like a little bit better than components, but like they're just inferior versions of items that already exist, so they're not that good. You don't really want to put this on a main carry, but they're items nonetheless, so they can help you to tempo early if you're trying to just get a quick cash out. For example, Salvage Revolver, gain 10 ability power every 5 seconds. This is like the world's shittiest Archangels. Archangels gives you 30 ability power every 5 seconds, so it's just like a third the power of an Archangel's. That's like the way you should look at these items. They're just like a little bit worse of a version of items that already exist. Now, these items, they all have interesting characteristics. You basically have the tier 1 items, the tier 2 items, and the tier 3 items. Tier 3 items are all perfected items, so they have a perfected bonus when you read them. Each item that you look at, they'll also give you recommended users. So if you're a beginner, don't worry if you don't really understand what the item is and what it does and all of that. It does tell you some extra users so that you can basically know who to put them on. But we'll read through them really quickly. Basically, Perfected Executioner's Chainblade, it gives AD and it gives attack speed. And basically, it gives your units an execute. And then on kill, you get durability as well as damage amp. By the way, the difference between the tier 1 and the tier 2 items is just the amount of stats that they give. As you can see, this one gives you less attack damage, less attack speed. The execute is smaller, the durability is smaller, the damage amp is smaller. It's basically all the numbers are just smaller when you go up the ladder. The item, in terms of what it does and what type of item it is the same, but it just, the stats are just worse. When it's perfected, it also has a perfective bonus where executes drop 3 gold and heals the holder for 400. Perfected Flesh Ripper, this is the one that typically is considered to be one of the worst ones. It's just because when you're playing around Chem-barons, you're typically trying to play around Silco, which is an AP unit. This is not only an AD unit, it also doesn't have a good effect that you can put on Silco. Even Executioner Chainblade, even though it's like AD and attack speed and execute are pretty good on Silco, so you can still play around the Executioner's Chainblade and then put on other units if you really have to. Perfected Flesh Ripper is the one where it's like you literally have to put on Smeech or Savika. Nobody else can really make use of this. But basically, it's like after drop below 40 health, become intangible, restore 100% max health. It's like a better Guardian Angel. And then if you die for the first time, you revive with 100% max health, which is just like, it just boosts you quite a bit. So it's more for like a frontline melee type of unit. Perfected Destabilized Chem Tank. Basically, it gives you a health shield every little bit. So this actually has really good synergies if you have like anything that deals with shielding. The perfected bonus is that you also do additional damage. Like you fire these vials that chip away at max health. Perfected Piltover Armor. It basically just gives you stacking armor and magic resist. Additionally, you also do true damage if you have the perfected version, which works in like a 4 hex radius. Virulent Virus. So what this does is after you deal ability damage, this one's more like an AP focused item. It gives attack speed and AP. Enemies then take an additional 45% damage over 3 seconds. So it has like an additional dot over time effect. The perfected bonus is that infected enemies deal less damage, and then when they die, they also join your side, which is just absolutely broken. It's kind of crazy. Perfected Unleashed Toxins, this is another AP item. Attack grant 10 bonus mana, so this is like somewhere between a Radiant Shojin and a regular Shojin, but basically it's just like, it's basically the way you should look at the other version of Perfected, Unleashed Toxins, is that it just gives you bonus mana similar to a Shojin. So it's like a Shojin replacement that also does additional damage. The Perfected bonus is that cast launch a wave that also deals 450 magic damage and stuns, which is just absurd. And then Perfected Shimmer Bloom, but this does increases shielding. Every 6 seconds you gain shield. Shield attacks, you gain additional ability power. This is something that they added a cooldown for because it was really broken before. And then Perfected Volcanic Saber is like every 4 instances that you do damage, it sends additional jolts that do additional physical damage. And then they also gain attack speed when they fire those jolts. Anyways, I just wanted to introduce all of the items. Now, that's very long-winded. If you want to see exactly where the items should go, I made this little chart. This is just like a visual guide. So based on whatever item you hit, what the recommended users are. However, it is important to note that some of these items you can put on other units. So for example, Rennie has really good scaling on both her AD, her HP, and her AP. So something like Executioner's Chainblade and Flesh Ripper, sometimes you could put on a Rennie, especially if you have a Rennie 3. Additionally, Voltaic Saverer, because it works on instances of damage, you can actually put on Silco. It's one of Silco's best items, because Silco, when he summons the monstrosities, does multiple instances of damage, so it greatly boosts the amount of damage he does. Even though it gives like AD and it seems more like an AD focused item, it actually ends up being a very, very strong Silco item. So you should definitely consider, it's probably the best on Silco out of everybody here, so that's just something to note, that it's not in the actual like toolkit of the like description, but it's really important. Additionally, these items might have very, very weird synergies with other units if you have a Chem-baron emblem, which we'll talk about later. So there's other units that if you read the abilities or you read what these items do, they might synergize better with other abilities that other units have as well. Because you can put it on a unit as long as they have they're a Chem-baron. If you put a Chem-baron emblem on them, they become Chem-baron. So now we're gonna start talking about a little bit of other stuff. We're gonna start talking about like the boards, right? So 500 plus cash out, this is what's considered usually the instant win, and only in very, very rare situations do you get less than a top 2, and that's usually if the lobby is very high roll, because in order to get to 500 cash out, you have to play on a very, very thin margin. Whenever you're playing around the 500 cash out, typically what you're aiming to do is you're aiming to just play vertical Chem-baron. A lot of times you have 7 Chem-baron in, so you can usually put a Chem-baron emblem on a Mundo because he's going to be one of the ones that you play often, but you're basically just playing all the Chem-baron units. With the Chem-baron trade, if you get to a 500 cash out, basically 500 cash out means that you skipped 4 shops, right? Because you skip a shop every 100 Shimmer. So if you skip 4 shops, basically you're going to gain around 600 to 700, like it's like 660 HP on your whole board. It's like equivalently just giving a Warmogs to everybody. So it's very effective to just leave in and play all the Chem-baron units. You literally just play all the Chem-baron units, you play Silco, and then you put in Mundo for Dominator because he just helps out the front line a little bit. All your units are going to be extremely tanky because they're all going to get a bunch of HP. If you're playing around these units, you can basically slot in anybody to try and synergize. If you get a Savika cash out, you might want to put Savika synergies. Silco cash out, you want to put Silco synergies. But the idea is that you're going to plan your early game around making some sort of items here. For Silco, a lot of the time when you're playing Chem-baron and you're trying to go for the 500 cash out. Silco is a lot more reliable to hit than Savika because obviously Savika is a 5 cost. So you don't want to necessarily make items like this, like melee items, because if you don't hit a Savika, then you're forced to play around Smeech as a carry, which is very unreliable. So a lot of times you're just going to play 7 Chem-baron with Dominators. Silco's best items are Shojin Nashers, and then you just got to hope that you get one of the Silco items. The odds are pretty good for Silco items, by the way, because there's 3 items that are pretty good on Silco. However, something like Virulent Virus, it's basically like a glorified Shojin, so sometimes it seems really bad, or it feels really bad when you're trying to play around Silco. You've already made a Shojin and a Nashers usually, and then you get Virulent Virus, so it doesn't do as much as something like Unleashed Toxins or Voltaic Saber. So there is a lot of like variance. Additionally, like with some of the tank stuff, it helps out a lot to have Chem-baron on Mundo, because then you can put some of the tank items on Mundo, because Mundo is just generally a really, really strong tank. Additionally, you can put them on Rennie if that's plan B. If you're playing around 7 Chem-baron, you can also go for Rennie 3 Smeech 3, and you can just keep re-rolling on level 8 which is typically where you're going to do your roll down. But either way, depending on what you hit, you then put in a synergy to help out your board. Here I'm just showing Rumble as an example because I get whole board Sentinel because of the Singe. You can also put in a Bruiser to get whole board HP because of the Rennie, but I prefer Sentinel in because I'm already getting HP because of the Chem-baron trait. Savika is also really good to cap out your board. If you're able to make split items like this, like if it's a very high item galaxy, then you can make Silco items, you can make Mundo items, you can make Savika items, or like melee attack items, because that way you cover all your bases so that you don't low roll on hitting like an item that you can't put on Silco or an item that you can't put on a tank, and then you just run yourself into a really bad spot. That's like a big aspect of Chem-baron. A big aspect of Chem-baron is that you have to plan around these things. Now, I don't know how it is for you guys in your games, but you know, especially when you're playing Chem-baron, you have to preserve as much HP as possible. So a lot of times you have to prioritize. Like first carousel, you have to pick an item. You have to make your items early. So a lot of times you have to make either Silco items or melee items. So a lot of times you end up with something that looks like this, and this is where the RNG comes into play. Now 500 cash out, all the items when I was reading them, they just sound broken. They do so much. They are so incredibly strong that you're fine. But a lot of times what ends up happening is, if you're playing the game and you get 300 or 400 cash out, it feels like a top 4, but it's also, if you're unprepared, you can also lose off of the cash out, right? If you're playing this type of board, sometimes with a 300 or 400 cash out, if you don't hit a Silco item, like let's say you hit like Flesh Ripper, I'll just put them on Rennie for example, I'll put them on Singed for example. You hit Flesh Ripper and you hit like, I don't know, let's pick another shit one. You hit like Virulent for example. It's like I've already made a Shojin and Nashers. It's hard for me to plan around not making a mana item because it's so important for Silco. So usually Shojin is like the #1 priority if you're going to play around Silco. Then you hit another thing that's like a mana item. It's good. Don't get me wrong. It's definitely good on Silco. But it's like, it's a little bit of diminishing returns. And you would rather have one of the better items. But even worse, what if you just don't get a Silco item, right? And you just get like tank item and AD item. Well, it's like, well, now what do you do? It's like, well, nowadays it's a lot easier because you can maybe play around Smeech and you can try and go for like a Smeech 3. You could also play around Rennie 3. Smeech is not as contested. This was a big problem last patch when Smeech was like giga contested because of ambushers, so that was just very difficult. But if you high roll into a Savika, then you can obviously play the stuff on the Savika. But the problem is, if you prioritize your items one way, you know, you can't even not make 3 items on Silco. A lot of times, like when you're playing Chem-baron, you're going to end up with a situation like this, where you make 3 Silco items, and then you get another Silco item, then you have to move the item onto like a Renata because you don't know what to do. You have to put the Chem-baron item on the Silco, and it just feels very clumsy, right? And the reason it's really bad at the 300 and 400, the reason it feels that way with 300, 400 is because you're in a spot where it's like you're not getting the perfected items. So there's a good chance that if you hit like if your tier 2 item isn't that good on your board, you feel like it's almost like you're down a cash out against other people. So it's very risky, and this is the part where it becomes very fuzzy. What's a way to remedy that? Well, if you look at the stats, right, in general, like what good performing comps are this patch, and probably in your own experiences, Silco is a strong unit, right? You can easily just play around Dominator with Silco, right? So what you can do is, instead of just forcing yourself to play all of these Chem-baron units and having like these awkward items, you can choose to pivot, right? You don't have to full pivot. Like you could full pivot into like a Dominator Silco board instead. And that's a viable option. That's like if you look at your Shimmer shop and you're like, this is absolute dog shit, I'm just gonna play around Silco. I do this a lot, right? A lot of times, like, I'll just pivot off of Chem-baron if my augments aren't good or my items aren't that great. The reason that I do that is because if you're not in a spot that you think that you can get a 500 cash out and you see a really bad 300 cash out, you can either push your luck and try and go for a 400 cash out, or you can just play it like a normal 4 cost, right? A very viable strategy is to just play your 4 costs, right? That's what this is an example of, right? Like you can lose streak and then just play Silco. That's a viable strategy. You don't have to lock yourself into Chem-baron. So a lot of times what I'll end up doing is I'll do something like this, right? I'll get a 300 cash out. Maybe it gives me 1 Silco item. Like if I hit, I hit. Like let's say I hit like the low tier version of this. But in order to strengthen my board, I'm not getting that much HP, right? If I take a 300 or 400 cash out, I'm not getting that much HP on the Chem-barons, so these units don't become extremely tanky and worthwhile to put in the front line, in my opinion, obviously. So instead, I just pivot to Black Rose, right? Black Rose Dominators, and what I do is I just play Rennie, over one of the other frontline units, right? You just play Rennie. Rennie synergized with Elise, so you have Bruiser for your whole board, which is really nice. You just play 3 Chem-baron to keep the Chem-baron items active. And then often, if you want to play the 3rd Chem-baron, you can just play Singed. Singed has late game synergy with something like Rumble that gives you Sentinel. Singed also, if you read his ability, he gives attack speed to one of your units, right? The one that does the most damage. So Singed is actually very, very good at just buffing Silco a little bit, get a couple early stacks off, strengthening his Dominator, right? Because Dominator is all about getting early casts off. So you give him some attack speed early on, he gets set up for the rest of the fight. And you can just play like the same style that you would of playing a 4 cost, and you can drop on a lower level of Chem-baron. It's also really important that if you see a really good cash out on 300, you don't have to push to 400. You can just play this way instead. This is just an option. Obviously, it's up to you if you want to play vertical. It's obviously higher cap. If you're playing for first, this is not how you play for first. This is how you play for like 3rd, 4th, right? It's way better to push to 400 and 500 to get one of the better cash outs. Don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is, if your spot looks really sus, this is a way that you can still play for placements. Let's say your 300 cash out gives you Unleashed Toxins, which is one of the best Silco items you can hit. If you have Unleashed Toxins, you can just take the 300 cash out. You don't have to push for another cash out. If the items are good enough, just take the 300, just pivot off the other Chem-barons, because instead of just like having to be forced to play these units, because like, you know, you don't get that much HP, right? Like, let's say you're only 6 Chem-baron. If you only skip 2 shops, they're only gaining like around 300 HP each. If you don't have like a Rennie 3 or a Smeech 3 or a Savika, and you're just playing like a bunch of shit units, the extra HP isn't that important. You might be better off just pivoting to a Black Rose board, which is a really, really viable option. You can even pivot completely off of Chem-baron and just cap out around a bunch of 5 costs, but it also gives you a lot of higher level opportunities where you can play Jace and Mordekaiser. You're not just cluttering your board for the sake of just playing Chem-baron. Additionally, sometimes people play around 200 and 300 cash outs. Now, this is the part that is very, very, very interesting, and something that's coming up a lot more often on this patch. For example, Renata reroll is very, very strong. Silco with Black Rose Dominators, that's what I was talking about before. Even if you, like, you don't even have to go to 300. If your 200 cash out is a really good Silco item, and you think that you have a good spot for Silco, you could just stop playing Chem-baron, be up a resource on the rest of the lobby, because being up a resource is just up a resource, right? An item is an entire like silver or gold augment. If you get a good item for Silco, like either Voltaic Saber, right? If you see your 200 shop and it has either Voltaic Saber or it has Unleashed Toxins, you're basically just up a whole item on the lobby. You can just take an early cash out, play around the Silco. Obviously, this is not if you have like a Chem-baron emblem and you're playing, because if you have a Chem-baron emblem, obviously 7 Chem-baron is going to be broken. You have so much HP because of the trait. What I'm saying is, if you see that you have a good option to just pivot out, don't lock yourself in. Pivot out. Play just Silco Black Rose instead, and you can still play for a top 4. It's not going to be a first. It could be a first if you high roll, but you're back to like a normal game of TFT instead of just like guaranteed losing and then dying out after. Something that's becoming really popular is doing this with Renata, right? Renata reroll is a comp that is very, very strong right now. So basically the idea is that Renata does this thing where she like shields her opponent, shields her units, and does a shit ton of damage. So this is reroll line that's very, very efficient because it caps out very, very high on level 7. So what you do is you just roll for Singe 3. You could roll for Irelia 3 as well and Rel 3 as well, but typically you roll for Renata 3, Vex 3, and you basically roll for everybody 3-star. There's some troll positioning where, like, I tried out a couple times, I don't really believe in it that much, where you put Renata in between them, but the idea is that you're putting them in this, like, kind of shape, so that when Renata casts, she's always granting shield, because she grants shield through whoever her shot passes through. So she grants shield, which keeps all your sentinels really, really happy and healthy. But then she's also very, very strong in terms of the amount of damage that she does. And Archangel is like almost a priority because it gives her so much AP. And then she has so much tankiness that she gives to her units that she basically just, it's like a stall comp to a point where Renata then just starts one-shotting everybody. This is a comp right now that's very meta because Renata got buffed. Something that you can do that's very similar is you can play this with Chem-baron. Right? If you have a Chem-baron opener, you can just go into this variation. Now, this is a variation that I personally have tried and failed with, but I still think it's strong, so I'm telling you about it. But be warned, I have gotten a first playing like this. I have gotten a first playing like this. I have not gotten a first playing like this yet. So be warned, but it's still useful information. what you can do is you can play a similar comp around 4 Visionary, but instead of playing 4 Sentinel, you instead play around Rennie and Nunu that gives you Bruiser as well as Chem-baron. And what you can do is you can lose on stage 2, you can lose part of stage 3, and then you can take some of the cash outs. If you get a Renata item, which are very similar to the Singed items, I showed it on the slide before, you can then have an extra item for Renata, and then you can use that to help you win out. Additionally, if you hit an item that you can put on Rennie, then you get an extra tank item on Rennie or Singed. And a lot of times with this setup, you're trying to go for Renata 3, Singed 3, roll on level 5, but if you have the opportunity, you can also roll on level 6, and then you can try and go for Rennie 3, Singed 3, and Renata 3. It caps very high and it's very strong, and as you can see, this board is complete synergies on level 6, so you can push and you have a lot of flexibility. I put Morgana here because you can play Black Rose later, right? You can play Conqueror later. Well, you know, Conqueror is like its own thing, but Mbessa is really good as a next in because Mbessa basically gives your whole team some armor and MR. You can additionally just play towards playing a bunch of 5 costs. You can play Black Rose with like a Jace, Black Rose with a Rumble, etc. There's a lot of opportunity for you to cap out this board really high. This is something that's becoming a little bit more popular. This is like, you know, quote unquote Chinese tech, because it's something that like whenever Renata is a reroll thing in China right now, they do this variation instead of this variation. I think this variation is significantly easier to play, but it's another variation that you can have if you have a Chem-baron opener, right? And the idea is that additionally, like if you look at the Chem-baron cash outs, the reason this works so well is that a lot of these lower cash outs give you insane things. Look at this breakpoint of 200 Shimmer. 200 Shimmer you can get to very easily if you just lose all of stage 1. Or sorry, you lose all of stage 2, and then on stage 3, you lose a couple rounds, and then you win. Basically, there's like a 20% chance that you get an item, which is usable for either frontline or backline. Even if it's not a good item, you can still put pretty much anything on Rennie, because she has AP scaling, she has HP scaling, she has AD scaling. So you just put one of those on Rennie. But additionally, it gives you a lesser Shimmer duplicator. So this duplicates a Chem-baron unit. So you get a Chem-baron duplicator, basically. And then you get a 2-star Renata. So this cash out effectively gives you 4 Renatas. If you're going for a 3-star Renata, you could just play, and then you just take the 200 cash out and just hit her for free, right? Additionally, there's lots of different versions that all give you like either 2-star Rennie, 2 copies of Rennie, copy of Renata, 2-star Singe. Like this one that's considered to be normally pretty bad is actually really good if you're just angling yourself towards a Renata reroll from the start, which you can do both, right? You can choose to play around the Renata reroll, because if you start with a Renata, you just gather copies of them. And then if you get griefed, for example, like if your Chem-baron gets griefed, you can pivot because Renata items are often very similar to Silco items, Shojin Nashers, right? If you see one of the good cash outs for you, you can take an early cash out. Same thing with like these later cash outs, right? That's why 400, by the way, is so strong, right? 400 cash out and 500 cash out are so strong because you have the potential to get multiple copies like 2-star Rennie, 2-star Smeech, 3-star Renata Glass. These cash outs compared to 300 give you a really, really strong potential to get 3-star Rennie while playing 7 Chem-baron. That's why 400, in addition to getting the perfected item, 500, it also gives you so many copies of the units that these extra things that you might take for granted, right? Imagine like a 500 cash out. You get a 3-star Singed, which has a shit ton of HP because you made it to 500. This is really good to play on your board. So that's something you should always consider. Additionally, once you get your first cash out, you can then keep going. You keep winning with it and get additional cash outs. Like these 200 cash outs where you get a tier 1 item are pretty good depending on the tier 1 item. But either way, you can just keep pushing. Your units gain a bunch of HP because your Chem-baron, so every shop that you skip, you get like, you know, if you see an item that you don't like, you skip the shop, they get HP. So this Rennie's going to become a Giga Tank. But additionally, you can also use it to get extra items and cap out your board very, very high. The way that you think about it is that if you played in set 10, it's very similar to Heartsteel, right? In Heartsteel, when the units became really strong, Ezreal got a bunch of buffs. What happened is everyone was playing Heartsteel, and you played Heartsteel for even if you were winning. Even though it's a loss streak trait, you would just play it from a win because you would just be in a really, really good spot. After like you lose, you play Ezreal, and then after that you just win and you get repeated cash outs that then strengthen your board. The same with Chem-baron. You can just push the Shimmer shop, get HP, or you can use the Shimmer shop to get items for the units that are on your board. These are other options that you can look at in order to make Chem-baron a little bit more consistent for yourself. Last thing we're going to talk about, and then we're going to go into a little bit of showing a little bit of a game, is Chem-baron emblem. is broken. There are weird interaction with some of the items, and there's like new tech because of that, right? If you look at the Chem-baron stats, this is a Chem-baron emblem. As you can see, if you have an emblem, it makes it way more consistent to play the comp, which is why I say you should really only try and angle Chem-baron with a Chem-baron emblem a lot of times. That's how I at least try and do it. Or I have to have a really, really good spot on stage 2, like I have a Rennie already. You'll see that, of course, Chem-baron emblem's good on Mel, a 6 cost, really high cap. Warwick, a 6 cost. We'll come back to you. Victor, another 6 cost. It's crazy that this guy's above him. Mordekaiser a 5 cost. Rumble a 5 cost. Jace a 5 cost. These all fit in really well with either Dominator, Black Rose, or what's it called? Or Sentinel. Like, they're all useful. Jace, which just has really good scaling in multiple ways. Mundo. Vi is Pit Fighter, and she can make use of a lot of the AD items. So if you have a Chem-baron emblem, you can put the AD items on Vi, which is a lot easier to find than a Savika. So you can just roll for Vi if you hit like Flesh Ripper, for example, but it only really works with Chem-baron emblem because she won't be able to hold the items unless she's a Chem-baron unit. But one of these is not like the other. I'm sure you can figure it out that one of these doesn't belong. Why is Kog'Maw so broken? Why? Well, I'll tell you why. If you look at his board, right, like you look at his item trios, there's one of these that is clearly not like the others, and that is this one, right? Chem-baron emblem, perfected unleashed toxins. This is tech that like is very situational, obviously, but if you ever see something like perfected unleashed toxins and you have this is a 500 cash out, basically 500 plus cash out, and you have a Chem-baron emblem, guess what? It averages a 95% win rate. I know it hasn't been played that many times. The play rate is very low, obviously. It is insane. It is insanely strong. And the reason it's so strong is because of the synergies between Kog'Maw's ability, which he just casts a bunch of time. That's his thing. He casts and he gains attack speed. If you read the perfected bonus, it does 450 magic damage and then stuns enemies. This unit literally just stuns the board instantly, and like for the rest of the game they can't move. He just stuns on repeat and on cooldown with this item. These are some of the interactions that come with the Chem-baron emblem, which specifically is like new tech. But that's what I'm saying, like as much as I want this guide to like live forever, there's gonna be stuff that comes up, right? Units are gonna get changed, patch notes are gonna happen, things are gonna get buffed, things are gonna get weaker. So some of the things I'm saying here might not last the test of time, and obviously this is from a mixture of my own experiences, watching better players than me, chatting in those chats and asking them questions about it, trying to see like, hey, am I understanding this right? Because I do all that to try and research to make you guys good guides. So roughly everything that I've been saying here is stuff that I've seen in tournament level play with good players, and it's stuff that I myself have tried out personally so that I can see roughly a good opinion on it. This Kog'Maw tech I haven't tried out, but like I've heard about this shit and it just sounds broken. And of course, as people play more Chem-baron, because now Chem-baron got a lot of buffs this patch, you might see it appearing a little bit more often. So make sure to, like, if you are creative enough to think about like how these items can interact with different units. I already know there's stuff like there's one that scales off shields, and there's anomaly shields, and then it goes like Giga Infinite. There's like options like that. There used to be one with Chem-baron on Mordekaiser. That one got removed because it was actually a bug. It was like Mordekaiser with the Shimmer Bloom. He used to get like 2000 AP and one-shot the entire board. But there's lots of interactions that might be really weird that unlock themselves with Chem-baron emblem. Just have to be aware of this. So you should always like, reinforce these ideas, double check sometimes. Like I double check the stats like this if I'm trying to optimize boards, just to see what's a little bit better in certain situations. Anyways, before we end, I'm just going to show you a little bit of my Chem-baron game so you can kind of see what I do in some of these situations. So this game, I'm just going to skip to stage 4. I won a round here. I actually won 2 rounds, right? The reason this game went so poorly for me, despite being a Chem-baron game, was because this was a game where you see some guy's already dead at stage 4. He basically just saw that I was Chem-baron, opened his board, sold everything, and just like full committed to losing the game. So he just lost the game just to grief me, and he just died. So that was fantastic. That was amazing. So I got my Chem-baron griefed. As you can see, I'm not even at a 400 cash out. I'm at a 300 cash out. And you're going to notice something. I have Chem-baron emblem, right? I can play around 7 Chem-baron, which even no matter what, if you have a Chem-baron emblem, you should always play around 7 Chem-baron. The HP is just too great at that point. Whenever I talk about dropping Chem-baron units, it's not with a Chem-baron emblem. I'm always talking about it when you don't have a Chem-baron emblem. I want that to be very clear. As you can see here, what I end up doing is I try and stabilize around Heimerdinger. I took Orn Artifact. I got a Manazane. I found a Savika, so I'm going to be 7 Chem-baron. And I try and just like convert my board. I already won a round, so I don't really care about losing anymore. I don't have enough HP to start another loss streak. So even if I hit like 7 Chem-baron, which gives 100 points per loss, I will never be able to reach much better. I can maybe greed and reach a 400 cash out, but like it's going to be very tight and very close. So instead what I do is I just commit to, okay, I have to take the lesser cash out here. Obviously I'm locked in because I have this Chem-baron emblem on the dummy. But eventually what you're going to see is that I win a couple rounds, because when you win, you just gain less Shimmer, you don't gain as much. But I get enough to make it to a 300 cash out. I don't think I can greed to go to a 400 cash out because I don't think my board is particularly strong as it is right now. And with this 400 cash out, I then hit Silco, 7 Chem-baron. I take the cash out, right? The cash out is Flesh Ripper, which is the worst thing that you want to see. So this is definitely a bad cash out, but I'm 7 Chem-baron, so obviously the power of 7 Chem-baron is massive. But Flesh Ripper 2 is not the one I would have wanted. I would have wanted Unleash Toxins 2, but Unleash Toxin is good enough on Silco, so I'm down, right? It's totally fine. So we just go for it. Also, I just want to note, I'm going to put a note in the video at the end. I think I was confusing Unleashed Toxins with the other vial. So I want to be very, very clear. So I'm going to put that as a note in the description. If I'm ever confused, Unleashed Toxins is the one that's really good on Silco. And the one that's the vial is the one that's not as good because it's like a Shojin. You usually have a Shojin already. So as you can see here, I put Anomaly on Heimer, right? The reason I put Anomaly on Heimer was because I only have Silco 1 and my Heimer is doing most of my damage. Eventually I hit Silco 2 and then Silco starts doing more damage. Like I said, I was in dire straits for much of this game, so this wasn't the greatest of games, so there's a lot of optimization I left on the table. But 7 Chem-baron, especially if you have an emblem, is very, very strong. If you can make it to 7 Chem-baron, you're usually in a win out even in a lower cash out. And that's something that I just wanted to illustrate, because I was talking a lot about different boards and pivoting and stuff like that. But typically, the HP that you get for all of your units with 7 Chem-baron is way, 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 way better than anything else you can play. So here, because I have the Fawn, because it's a prismatic lobby, I'm in a decent spot. If you watch till the end of the fight, I basically just lose this game because of RNG. I would have gone in first this game because I just get to a point where I am stronger than everybody else. I lose like my last fight to like... I'll show you the fight, but this is why I hate having Savika items, and I hate playing around Savika, and I hate like Flesh Ripper and all of this bullshit, because if I had a slightly better Silco item, like, god damn. Watch this fight, by the way. This is like a little teaser of a closer. I end up going third this game because I lose this fight, but watch how I lose it, right? The Vi hits my what's it called? My Mundo gets picked up, so the Violet doesn't reset on the Mundo. The Violet goes to my back line. And then my Savika, like, jumped all the way to the back because of Flesh Ripper and the whole fucking shit that she's doing and jumping around. She doesn't hit, she hits Flamethrower, but she's too far away to hit the Vander. So the Vander lives. She walks up slowly, right? Vander comes in, and then Savika rolls like the fucking money thing. So she summons money here instead of attacking him. And I lose in overtime. Imagine, like, this is what happens so many times with Chem-baron, by the way. This is why I always say, make sure you have a really good spot for it, right? Me, it turned out that I got grief this game, but that's why I didn't go first. Obviously, I still go third because I have 7 Chem-baron. If I didn't have 7 Chem-baron, I was going 8th. Like, this game was kind of chalked at one point. So you gotta be really careful. That's the main thing you gotta be careful. Hopefully I explained Chem-baron well enough for you guys to know how to play it, and that some of the boards were helpful, some of the guide was helpful. This one was a little bit longer than the other one with Conquerors, but there is just so much more information. I can't just say like random item here, random item there. So hopefully this was like a more like, you know, well-rounded, inclusive guide. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. Later traits are going to be a lot shorter because they won't have as much explanation of cash outs the same way as Conqueror and Chem-baron. So anyways, make sure to like and subscribe if you like my content. If you're liking the guides, I'm going to do more character guide stuff. Reroll guide should be out tomorrow that I'm working on. It's going to be similar to the forecast guide. And then we're going to do this week is going to have Orn Artifact guides and itemization guides. And eventually I'll probably do like guide for each of the traits, similar to how I did these ones. But anyways, thank you for watching, and hopefully it was fun. Enjoy. Have a great rest of the day.